after a
seismic,
momentous,
catastrophic
bombshell election loss.
Sussan Ley will become the first woman to lead the Liberal Party.
I am humbled, I am honoured, and I am up for the job.
The coalition has imploded, with the Nationals choosing to tear up their agreement with the Liberal Party.
This is one of the hardest political decisions of my life.
Today, David and I have reached agreement formally to reform the coalition. I reject characterisations of left and right, but I do believe that government is ultimately formed in the sensible centre.
Sussan Ley, thank you so much for joining the Daily Aus.
It's a pleasure, Billi. It's lovely to meet your team and see where you are and realise what a great group of young entrepreneurs TDA is.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Now, you are the new leader of the Liberal Party. You have replaced Peter Dutton after the last election. For anyone who might not be familiar with you, what do you want young people to know about who you are?
I want young people to know, first and foremost, that I want to listen to them and meet them where they are and not assume that I know what young people are thinking. We got a very serious and humbling message at the election. A lot of people didn't support us, and I want to go back into the community, and I'm not in lecturing mode, I'm in listening mode.
You mentioned the election, and I want to talk about it more because it was the coalition's worst loss in 70 years. What is your assessment as to why Australia rejected the coalition to the extent that they did?
We didn't have what they were looking for, or we didn't explain it well enough, or a combination of many factors. But I stood on polling booths and I talked to a lot of people coming in to vote. I got very strong messages back in many cases that we weren't considered, we weren't relevant, and we weren't meeting them where they were in their lives. So it was a very serious, humbling message. And my first statement was, we need to listen to that and we need to understand it better.
What does that tangibly mean, that you weren't meeting them where they were at? Like, what policies do you reflect on that maybe weren't what the Australian people wanted?
We had policies on home ownership, but young Australians didn't necessarily tune into them or accept them or hear them properly.
Did they not hear them or did they not want them?
I don't know the answer to that, but when I asked young people, often they hadn't really heard them, or they had heard a confusing mix of messages from both sides of politics and they weren't sure how to unscramble all of what it meant. Moving ahead a bit, perhaps in the stage of life that you might be at, I spoke to a lot of young mums who were worried about the work-family balance, something I identify with, having had 3 small children, family farming business, studying when I was in my 30s, rushing here, there and everywhere. And that sort of tension is there for a lot of people, and that includes young people these days. So we didn't necessarily have something that we were saying to that group that allowed them to believe that we understood what their lives were like.
I've heard you say that Australia clearly sent the coalition a clear message. What exactly do you think that message was?
It's a message that we reject your side of politics on this day, and we've parked our vote elsewhere. The next step is actually understanding what that message was, because it's not the same message everywhere, by the way. You could be in a different city, in a different town, in regional Australia and city Australia, and I've heard many, many different messages.
After the election, the Liberal Party briefly broke up with the Nationals. What happened?
Well, the Nationals and the Liberals traditionally are in coalition, and we both agree that we're stronger when we are. So we started from that point of view, and, we had a discussion about what that might look like, and without sort of picking over the details of it, there was a brief decision made to separate, which I wasn't comfortable with, and I don't honestly think the Nationals were comfortable with either. So we came back to the table to give it another go, and maybe took some inspiration from Charlie XCX and Lord and, got back together on the remix.
I've heard you say that to form government, it needs to be in the centre. The Nationals are further to the right than the Liberal Party. So do you think the Nationals will allow you to do that, to form a government in the centre?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with you that the Nationals are further to the right. I don't tend to use those expressions. They mean different things to different people, and I don't know that they're particularly helpful. Nationals Party members have a range of different views across a range of areas, just as we do in the Liberal Party. But what we will do when we come together is keep the team inside the tent, so to speak, when it comes to the decisions that we then prosecute with the Australian people.
But you're the one who has talked about needing to form government in the centre. And so I guess I understand that there are so many different opinions, but you're the leader. And as leader, do you think that you will be able to move them to the centre?
Well, it's not my job to move them where they don't want to go in their own party room, but they'll have those discussions, and I wouldn't necessarily agree that they are right, left, centre themselves. I mean, that's really up for them. And what I've said
You think
is
they might be left?
Look, I've heard all sorts of views from people who support the National Party, so it's definitely not the case that they're one group. But I mean, I'm not here to talk about them. I'm here to talk about the Liberals. And I know that the strength of our party room is a range of different views across what might traditionally be called left-right, but is really about where are the policies that meet Australians where they are.
I want to look, though, at a policy that I understand you have partly decided on, and that is nuclear. This was part of the reason that the coalition did break up after the election. The Nationals were for it, the Liberal Party was against it. Where do you stand on that today?
That we should, as a first step, lift the moratorium, and we've got broad agreement that that is a sensible first step. If you
And
like,
by
it's
moratorium, you mean lift the ban on nuclear energy
Yes.
in Australia?
Yes, so that it's possible to go ahead. So that's a very early, if you like, preliminary first step that we've agreed on. So what we haven't agreed is to take the exact policy that we had at the last election moving forward.
Just to clarify, though, that was always going to have to be the first step to introduce nuclear energy. So the election result has not changed the coalition's first step when it comes to nuclear.
It is always the first step, of course, because there is a ban that prevents nuclear power. So yes, it always is the first step, but people would remember that our policy at the last election was much more detailed than that and involved considerable investment by government and even detailed the location of nuclear power stations. So that is no longer our policy, but the preliminary step, if you like, of lifting that ban is.
I just want to understand this more because you were willing to break up the coalition partly over nuclear. That has now changed. And so in the end, was it a case of politics getting in the way of what you actually believe?
Look, there were many issues on the table, and this wasn't, by the way, the main one.
But it was part of it.
There were 3 other policies that the Nationals were talking about, and we arrived at a sensible place with those. And I think that nuclear, we arrived in a place that all Australians would agree with.
Let's turn to women in the Liberal Party. You have said in the past that you support quotas for women. As leader, will you introduce quotas into the Liberal Party?
Quotas, if they exist, are a matter for the state divisions. So sometimes my remarks before, you've perhaps not quite captured them, but what I want to explain is how it works with our state divisions. And before I say that, by the way, I need to emphasise that I want to see more women in the Liberal Party. But we're a federated body. We don't decide everything from the position of leader. Each of our divisions is responsible for its own world, if you like, when it comes to selections.
So you're saying that as leader, you can't do anything on quotas for women in the Liberal Party?
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
Well, you're capturing something that's very narrow and specific. So let's step back and say, what do we want to achieve? We want to achieve more women in the party. So that is a challenge that I will certainly make clear to all of our divisions. And in everything I ever say as leader, when I address those divisions, either in public or, at the various forums that we find ourselves, I will be emphasising the importance of that.
With it being up to the state divisions, so my understanding is that the state divisions do already have a target, and a target is different to a quota because a quota is a requirement and a target is not. But they already have that target in place and it hasn't worked. The number of coalition women in the lower house has actually gone backwards in the last election. Now less than a quarter of lower house coalition MPs are women. So do you concede that the targets being up to the state divisions is not working?
Well, the first point to note is that when we lose an election and we lose seats or people who've put their hand up don't win, then we don't get those women in the parliament.
Sorry, I have to pull you off on that because I understand you can't control who Australia votes for, but you can control how many women are chosen as candidates. And only a third of the Liberal Party's candidates at the last election were women.
So this is a strong message to the state divisions. Do this better so we have more women. But again, we do need to respect the processes that the divisions have, and we also need to accept that they need to reach out and get more women joining and putting their hand up in the first place.
So you're saying you can't control the quotas for women in the Liberal Party. Something you can control, though, is the shadow cabinet. And your colleague, Senator Sarah Henderson, was amongst several senior coalition women who were demoted in the shadow cabinet. In her statement, she said, "I regret that a number of high-performing Liberal women have been overlooked or demoted in the new ministry." If your own colleagues don't believe that you have supported women in this new ministry, why should Australia?
Oh, well, I have supported women in the new ministry, and I also understand that when somebody isn't able to be found a place, as was the case with a couple of my female colleagues, they're going to be disappointed. They're even going to be hurt. I understand that. I know the feeling of not being chosen to be in that grouping. But
what do you mean by that?
Well, I know the feeling of, over my political career, there's been times when people have been selected to be in shadow ministries, shadow cabinets, or cabinets, in fact, of government, and I haven't been chosen.
That was my understanding. That was quite different, though, because you were demoted to the backbench because of allegations of misusing public funds.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about my entire career and where I might or might not have been chosen to step up. So there's been many phone calls from leaders over the years, or no phone call as it happens, to invite you to be part of, for example, a cabinet or a shadow cabinet that I haven't received. So my point is not just that one instance that you remarked on, but that my point is everyone can't be found a place. So I do understand the disappointment, but the party is led by a woman, and whenever the big calls are made, whenever there's big decisions to be made on policy, I'll be there with very much that lens from a female perspective.
I want to turn to young people. How would you describe your party's relationship with young people?
It needs to improve. There's no doubt about that. And I think part of that is meeting young people where they are and listening carefully to what they're telling us and not assuming that we know what they may seek from their political representatives. And I want to do that very sincerely and very openly in the weeks and months ahead.
On the topic of young people, Labor is about to introduce legislation specifically for young people to reduce student debt loans by 20%. Will the coalition support that bill?
We're going to look at everything anew. As I said when I came into this position, we're not carrying policies forward. We're going to pause and consider everything. So we will consider that legislation as it comes forward. We haven't seen it, obviously. And when we do, we'll have a discussion within our party room about how we respond to it.
So my understanding is that you have previously said that you will reject that bill, but are you saying now you could be open to supporting it?
Well, we haven't seen the bill, so I would never say that I would or wouldn't support something that we haven't seen the details in legislation.
But in the past, the coalition has said that it won't support it.
But in the past, we said a lot of things. What I said when we came into government was we're going to review our policies.
And so you're saying you're open to supporting that bill?
We're open to looking at it. And every time someone says to me, are you for this or against this? Or, do you believe this or that? I say, look, we've got the time to get this right. And we need to take the time to get it right.
So that's Labor's proposal to help young people. What's your proposal?
Well, we need to come up with proposals around housing, around incomes, around the cost of rents that is skyrocketing, about livability in our capital cities. These are the things that young people are talking to me about already. But as I said, I want to listen more and hear more.
Another issue that young people care a lot about is climate change. You are a former environment minister, and when you were environment minister, you were sued by a group of young people who argued that you should have a duty of care to protect them from climate change. Now, they initially won that case, then you appealed, and then you eventually won. Why do you not believe that governments should consider young people when making decisions?
I never comment on cases that have been before the courts, that particularly ones that I might have been involved in the executive of government. So I'm not going to comment specifically on that case.
So can I just ask a literacy question? It's over now, so you can comment on it, right?
But I'm not going to comment on it.
Okay.
Because
that's just
forward,
a personal decision.
Yeah, because going forward, I think the most important thing is that we acknowledge that climate change is very important to young people, and it should be very important to Australians in terms of the management of our environment as well, and in playing our part to reduce global emissions. And when I was Environment Minister, I was able to secure $1 billion for the Great Barrier Reef, which was about the catchments, about the oceans, about a whole range of things. But because we had the resources to do that, we were able to actively protect such a critical part of this country. Similarly, the things that we did in Antarctica and with threatened species around the country. So I often talk to young people about the environment, and they're not always aware of the things that we did. And I think it's important too that when we do something well as a coalition, that we reflect on that.
Do you believe, putting the case aside then, do you believe that government should consider young people when it's making decisions about the environment? I think
all political parties should listen to young people, but they should listen to everyone.
But listening is different to actively considering their perspective when you're making decisions about the country.
Look, I understand that a lot of young people, in fact, many young people that I talk to do talk about the environment and do talk about climate change and do talk about that importance. But again, I'm not going to put all young people into one group and say they all want this, they all want that, which, we've got to be careful not to do that. Because, if I walk around a big city, I think the first thing people will talk about is their cost of living and their rent right now. It doesn't mean that these other things aren't important as well. It just means I'm not going to land on where we should or shouldn't be with policies going forward until we've had that really thorough discussion.
Finally, Peter Dutton repeatedly rejected our interview requests. You are, of course, here, and we very much appreciate your time. Is there an acknowledgement that at the last election, the coalition failed to adequately engage with young Australians?
I think so. Yes. I mean, I've always been happy to engage with you, but yes, I think we do need to acknowledge that, and I think we need to acknowledge that we didn't engage in a lot of different areas. But it doesn't mean that everything we did was wrong, but it does mean we need to review what we did, and it does mean we need to take the time to get it right going forward.
Is there one thing that you want to do differently to your predecessor, Peter Dutton?
I'm not going to reflect on Peter. We have different styles, and I wouldn't do that. This is about the future. But I want to consult. I want to listen, and I want to more broadly engage with every single aspect of Australian society in every corner of this country. My model of leadership is a servant leadership model, which is about doing what I can to support the people around me so that we can all together work hard for the Australian people.
Just lastly, you might have seen that at the last election, we tried to do a leaders debate. We wanted to do the first ever youth-focused leaders debate in Australia. That did not get up because we could not get into contact with Peter Dutton. But I want to get in early for the next election. I'm wondering, would you commit to that for the next election?
Look, I'm sure I shall. I'm sure I have no problem with that.
I will be banging down your door. Sussan Ley, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.